All right, howdy, good Friday afternoon, everybody. We're coming to you from San Antonio. This is the Deer Breeders Corporation convention, and I thought, what a better place to do this chronic wasting disease little Facebook Live. I've got some friends of mine with me, and I'll introduce you to them in a minute, but I want to tell you, last week we wound up introducing that we were going to do this, announcing it, and asking for questions. So we didn't get bogged down during this event with a lot of questions. So we've already got a lot of questions. I mean, I'm still getting questions. I mean, they're coming in. And so more than likely the question that you have, hopefully we'll have time to answer it on here. The thing about these Facebook things, everybody wants to make them short because we want consumer media real quick. The problem with chronic wasting disease, it's not a short issue. Okay, it's not something that can be consumed in an 8-second soundbite. It's not something you can explain to somebody in a real short period of time. And so it's for that reason that it takes time to figure out really what's going on and the truth about things, because there's so much fake news out there, so there's so many political agendas out there that are really pulling people from one side or the other, trying to influence them. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to get people that are passionate about deer, they're knowledgeable about deer, and they've got a lot of experience with chronic wasting disease, and where they can answer your questions. And so I'm going to read these questions, and I want to know if y'all can't hear us. I mean, because we've got terrible audio in here and stuff, but this is the best place we can find. Let us know, okay? Because I don't know if you, let us know. And actually, Maddie's the one holding the camera over there, so or the phone, and so she'll let us know. But we want to make sure that you can hear us and that this is understandable. I want to encourage you that at the end of this, if you've got questions, go ahead and post them, and we'll do everything we can to get back with you. But I want to go ahead and get started. First, I'll say thank you. I want to tell you that if you're concerned about chronic wasting disease, I'm glad that you are. I'm glad that you're listening, because we're all concerned about chronic wasting disease, and we should be. But I think we ought to also be very reasonable in the way that we think it and the way we approach the disease, and look at, and I've always been a believer, as everybody in here, what we need to do is what is best for white-tailed deer first, period, regardless of wherever they live. It doesn't matter. This convention down here is full of people that they're deer breeders. We breed deer, we sell them to other places that want to have great genetics, and this is an industry. And so many times I think that we're often misunderstood, and what we want to do is we want to help you understand who we are and really what's going on with chronic wasting disease. So to get started, I'm going to let Tim Condict, he is Executive Director for the Deer Breeders Corporation, tell you about who he is and who these folks are.
Thank you very much for joining in today to watch Facebook Live, because what we'll be putting out today is actual facts, and you will hear that from other sources. But we are actually going to put out facts today for you guys to understand more about CWD and the concerns that you have with it. We have some experts sitting in the room, and to my left is Dr. Greg Stewart. He's from Georgia. He has researched tons and tons of things about CWD. He's the most knowledgeable person probably in the United States as far as putting all the different papers together for a common sense answer to all the questions that we have out there. Because as people that are out there that are not doctors and not biologists and things of that nature, it's very hard for us sometimes to understand what all the complicated words are and everything that people use. And Dr. Stewart is probably the best guy I know of in the nation at putting things down into terms that everyone can understand. Over here is Dr. Paul Stonum. He's from Missouri originally. He's at Texas Tech right now. He is one of the heads of the vet department out at Texas Tech. He's a very knowledgeable guy in a lot of areas concerning deer and CWD. Sitting right here is Ernest Smith. He's one of the smartest guys I know, period, in the world, but he is also very knowledgeable in CWD, and Texas Tech has been working on some things out there that I will let him talk about in a minute. But he's a very, very knowledgeable guy about CWD and all of the TSCs, transmissible spongiform encephalopathies that exist in the world today and all the different species. I'm going to kind of start off, and then I'm going to hand the ball off to these guys, and I'm going to tell you that the way I know so much about CWD, because Keith's putting it out that it's experts on CWD. I'm an expert at getting things done. I'm not an expert at knowing all the technical terms, but I've been in the trenches of CWD for 20 years. And attaching the name doctor to someone's name does not make them an expert. I have been digging the ditch. I know how to dig the ditch. I know all the information on it. I assimilate the information and I put it together where it makes sense. Because a lot of this doesn't make sense to even the people that know the most about it. And so last week, there was a Facebook Live by a family that has a hunting show on TV. And they were putting it out that it was about the facts about CWD to try to help you understand more about CWD. It was more about misinformation about CWD. And I kind of have prepared a little bit of stuff here, and I'm going to read it off because I want to make sure I don't mess this up for y'all. But to pretend that a Facebook Live conducted by a family that has a hunting show was education was a misrepresentation and should embarrass them. To bring together a group of people that all have a public agenda to point their fingers at the deer breeding community and try to put hard-working families out of business. These are people that love deer hunting so much that their dream was to be able to have the animals in their backyards, to be able to learn more about them and have a hands-on basis every day to see all of the things that we never get to see if we don't raise deer ourselves. It's one of God's greatest creations to the opinion of all the people sitting here and all the people in the hunting community across this country. As family farms declined across this country, the cost of the initial investment to become into traditional agriculture was astronomical. It decimated the family farm. We offer the ability to people to once again to be able to realize the dream of raising their children on a family farm and instill the ethics, morals, and values that these kids learn from a day's work of doing chores on a family farm into those children, when we think what a great country we would have if every kid could be raised in that manner. They just want the opportunity to live their little tiny piece of the American pie, their little piece of their dream, to live out on a family farm and raise their kids in that rural environment. Wouldn't it be better if they spent their time working with us to find a solution for CWD? We've spent millions of dollars of our hard-earned dollars on research to stop CWD. I'm not aware of anyone else stepping up to the plate to help us.
Hold on. Now, I'm going to interrupt right here and say, we spent millions of dollars. You hear people all over the country, oh, there's been all this research done on CWD. These guys know the truth about who's spending the money on the research, who is funding the research, and who is it?
The deer breeders.
It's us. Is that all right?
Correct.
Okay, we're the ones that are funding it. So when you have these guys out there, these other TV shows that are spreading this misinformation, I want to know how much money, and I hope they're watching right now, how much money have you spent towards real research? The money that you get is being spent towards bullets and regulation, and it's not being spent towards research. These guys we're doing research, so go ahead.
The only solution that has been offered to us at this time is regulation and slander. Making false statements isn't going to solve anything, prevent or slow CWD. If you want to help solve CWD, you can go to dbcdeer.com, find our address, and send whatever you can afford to send, because we have to accumulate. All the hunters should be working together, all the people that sell feeders, all the companies that make clothing for hunters, all the people that make guns. Everybody should be working together to help us solve CWD. We have the animals in an environment where we can make that happen, and we're working on it on a constant basis. We have several different research projects going at this time that's costing us a bunch of money that we don't mind spending because we want to solve CWD, but we're not pointing our fingers at everyone else trying to get them to.
Okay, go ahead. Now, let me jump in right quick and say, okay, you're saying research on deer farms. That is the best place in the world for research. If you've got a better suggestion, hit us below. Let us know where else to do it. We have captive animals that are watched every single day, 24/7. And what better place to study what's going on with white-tailed deer, and not just with CWD, with any disease, than a deer farm? Go ahead.
Well, we heard them say last week that there was no live test. It really seems a little odd to us, being that we have actually done approximately 75,000 of those live tests in the state of Texas at this time. The live testing is a more accurate and better test than the OBEX test, which is what all of the other people across this country use, post-mortem, which means they're dead, versus anti-mortem, which means they're alive. The live tests are more accurate than the post-mortem test. So when they say that there's no live test, it's an absolutely false statement. There are several of them. The biologist that was their expert, but in my opinion is a hitman, makes his living from deer as well, just like we do. So do the people that hosted that show. So do the people from the Department of Conservation that sat in as the experts on there. And so do all the people that sell feeders, corn, all the different things that are sold across this country to service deer hunters. All participate and make their living out of the deer industry. And so to single us out and say that it's wrong that we make our living off of deer, we seem to be taking a slanderous approach and a public opinion agenda to try to put us out of business. The Family with the Hunting Show obviously brought in a group of people that all had the same agenda. They all had the same answers, but to call someone an expert was a stretch of the imagination. The people that sat in here today with us actually do know what they're talking about. Texas has it in 3 different general geographical locations across the state. There's one area of that where it is in high fence hunting facilities in the state of Texas. There's 2 other areas of that where it is not in high fence hunting facilities. The state of Virginia does not allow any high fence operations in their state. They have CWD. The state of West Virginia, next door, has had CWD in the wild for 12 years and has never had a positive in a breeding facility that tests 100% of their animals. North Dakota has had CWD in the wild for 10 years and never tested a positive in a breeding facility in their state. Wyoming is the most infected state in the nation and has never allowed deer breeding or any kind of high fence hunting facilities in their state. Maryland has CWD in their state. They have never allowed deer farming or in their state. Arkansas has a 25% infection rate in the area where they have CWD, and they've never had a positive in a breeding facility in the state of Arkansas. So my point is we have had CWD come into our facilities, and we find it because we test 100% of the animals, and we find it for them. There has never been a case that a deer breeder has transferred deer to another location and CWD has gotten out of that location into low fence deer. There is not one documented case, but there are a bunch of documented cases where their animals have given it to us. Thank goodness we were in the state of Texas when we found CWD in Texas. Our agencies worked with us. We took a different approach to CWD, and I would say that we have been by far the most successful in the nation of any state that's found CWD in the wild of actually addressing the problem and dealing with it in a manner that has common sense to it. Anyway,
let me jump in again. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just jumping in here. If CWD was going to decimate the deer herd, as we've all been told, and they said it the other day, decimate the deer herd, it's going to be the end of the deer herd. I want to say, let's go back and look at Colorado and Wyoming, where you've got a prevalency rate of over 40% in some areas. Why is it that they still have hunting seasons there, year after year after year? Because the population keeps increasing, but they've got CWD and it's supposed to kill them all off. Could it maybe be something else? Well, research needs to be done, and it is being done to figure out how come it's not killing them off. That research can't be done out in the wild. It can, but it can't be effective research because you don't have a controlled area. We have controlled areas in deer farms, but you got any more? Because we got a lot of questions.
No, we got to go ahead and get these.
Okay, so here's some questions. First one: how do you prevent CWD from being spread with transportation of out-of-state high-risk carcasses?
We have a testing program that's part of USDA, and I'll bolster a little bit about the research being paid for by the industry. We're trying to put new regulations into the USDA program talking about genetic resistance. Well, where did the information about genetic resistance come from? We paid for that. You know, all of these industries paid for that. But to answer your question, I think the most succinct way to answer the risk that being alluded to in this question is in the state of Wisconsin, they elected to try to eliminate every walking deer from a small area of the state, about 30 square miles, give or take. And the state of Wisconsin spent 80-something% of their budget for 1 year, and I think it got up into $30 million, and their attempt was to try to kill every deer in that zone. At the end of the day, some years later, there's more deer in that zone now than there were before the sharpshooters came in. There's a higher incidence of CWD in that zone than before the sharpshooters began. But to directly answer the question, the state of Wisconsin, we were able to get these records from Freedom of Information Acts. They tracked the home zip code for a lot of these hunters that were invited into this zone. Okay, and there were thousands of people that had taken deer carcasses from out of this zone into home zip codes in South Carolina, in Alabama, in Georgia, and in Florida. So we have all of this 100% testing on live animals in order to be movement qualified, but we have no testing on high-risk materials coming from the brain and the spinal cord being transported all over the United States. And the question comes, did high-risk materials go from Colorado with a mule deer carcass to Virginia? Did they go from some high-risk area, somebody killed a trophy and took it to West Virginia? So we spend all this time and all this effort trying to blame this on captive deer facilities when we're really only looking at half of the equation. The second part of this story is there's a natural bias that's being brought into this discussion that doesn't follow science. I mean, the guys that are in quarrels with us about the height of the fence, these are the same guys that believe in the Second Amendment, the same guys that believe in property rights, the same guys that believe in the tradition of hunting, the same people that are trying to increase hunting in the younger generation. The only thing we're arguing about is the height of the fence. But those guys have adopted what's called the North American conservation model. And there's 7 guiding principles of the North American model. They're called the 7 sisters. And the seventh sister is that all of our decisions about managing wildlife will be science-based. An awful lot of what we're doing now in terms of agendas by certain people is not science-based. We're not following the natural transmission of this and trying to understand infectivity from one live animal to another in a natural setting. We find ourselves jamming material into the brains of animals. That's not a natural transmission. Famous case in point is we have a disease that's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy in humans called Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. And there was a case in North Carolina where they did neurosurgery on somebody that had CWD. Okay, well, they didn't know back in those days. They didn't properly disinfect the tools. And the next few patients that they used those tools on got Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. Again, that's jamming material and tools into the brain of an animal. But ask yourself this question. Did any of the caregivers of those patients, did any of the family of those patients get Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome downstream from that? The answer is no. So I think we basically need to understand that there's lots of strains of CWD out there, and we haven't done very much about characterizing them. There's lots of challenge experiments being done, but we've never done anything to standardize the challenge. Here's the interesting fact. We have a disease in sheep, a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy in sheep called scrapie. In the European theater, they went back and they did a retroactive study of all positive cases. There were like 4,300 cases retrospectively, went back, and all of these were called infectious scrapie on the first pass through the laboratory. They went back and they did Western blot analysis, which is a technique that teaches you something about the type of protein that you're dealing with, the quantity of it, its structure, etc. They went back and 27% of those cases that were called infective scrapie originally were now being diagnosed with the Western blot as sporadic or atypical, which the OIE and USDA now consider to be non-infectious. So we make a lot of mistakes, but are we going so fast with our agenda against high fence hunting that we've really forgotten about what objective scientific data is?
Okay, next question. Are there any real population declines from CWD?
There are about 3 or 4 instances if you search in the literature, some going back to a paper by Mike Miller in 2008 where he studied a small population in Boulder, Colorado, and he makes the statement in there that this could be possibly involved with population decline. That paper gets picked up and gets referenced by other people. Then we had a PhD dissertation published in Colorado in the last few years, where the young man in his public defense of his dissertation had orange to say, and when it finally got published, it was red to say. But what you do is you go back and you look at those populations that were being studied, and when you have a recruitment of 0.73 in a population, that population is already on the decline. It's not replacing itself. So for you to go in and superimpose some CWD testing on top of a declining population, this is disingenuous to me. And I'll show you with one case in point how things get skewed. We recently had a deer walking around in downtown El Paso, Texas. Okay, first time we had CWD in Texas, it walked across the border. It wasn't shipped across the border by a tested facility. This deer has lost a lot of weight. He doesn't look good. He's sacrificed by a game warden or other regulatory body out there with a rifle shot. They go in and they do a post-mortem on the carcass. The necropsy evaluation was this was a chronic pneumonia case. The animal has lost a lot of weight from having chronic pneumonia. There's very little functional tissue left in the lungs. They did CWD testing on that animal, and his retropharyngeal lymph nodes were positive, but there was no spongiform encephalopathy in his brain, no pathology in his brain, and his brain was not positive for IHC for testing for CWD. You cannot say that deer died of CWD. He tested positive for CWD, but the clinician, the D.V.M. PHD that did the post-mortem on it, is a friend. You know, we talked about the case. What killed that animal was a rifle shot from a game warden. What was killing that animal was chronic pneumonia. The fact that he's CWD positive is going to be used by groups to say that CWD killed that deer. Now, let's see very cleverly how the data can be skewed. If you look in Wisconsin, the road kills are picked up in Wisconsin. Okay, they sampled 4,300 roughly deer in the state of Wisconsin. They cut the heads off of them, they take them in, and they test them for CWD. If they turn positive for CWD, immediately that deer is given credit for dying from CWD. It wasn't that he was an HBC, he was slapped by a car or a truck. And if you go back and say, well, I'd like to look at some of the data about these 4,300 animals, not a single one of those tested heads had a necropsy done on the entire body of the animal. 0 out of 4,300. This is astounding to me, but this shows you how the data can be skewed. Shakespeare he said in one of his works, he said, even the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. And that's what's going on here.
See, what it amounts to is, like I said at the beginning, this is an issue that cannot be consumed in a short amount of time. You have to sit back and you have to think, where are these people? Do they have an agenda or not? And it appears that it's clear that there are some people who have an agenda. We want to know the truth. I mean, all of us, we want to know the truth. Okay, we're not pointing fingers at anybody else. We're looking at the data, and we're getting the data. Is the thing where the other people that are out there, it's like, lay your swords down. Lay your swords down. Stop fighting right now. Okay, what you need to do is we need to realize, you know what are you doing to help besides criticizing and wanting to kill deer? Okay, and strip people of their private property owner rights. And so this is an issue you have to stop a little bit. You got to spend some time to think about it, because I promise you, chronic wasting disease is not going away. It's not going to go away. Okay, let's get some more questions here. Okay, the difference between CWD and EHD.
You want to go, Paul? Go ahead. Yeah. Well, to a basic sense, CWD is associated with a protein that's abnormally folded, and EHD is actually induced by a virus. So the difference is one is viral, one is non-viral.
Okay. And how is the virus typically induced?
You're exposed to it in the case of the white-tailed deer through the midge. In terms of CWD, nobody knows exactly how you are exposed to that prion.
Okay, so the midge is a
EHD kills a lot of deer. A lot of deer. And if the deer are naive, it could kill 70 to 80% of a herd. But to compare CWD and EHD by saying that when an animal gets CWD, in every case, if you hold that animal long enough, is 100% fatal. That's a whole different story than EHD, which is a virus, which has nucleic acids in it, which is infectious, which we can build immunity to and we can control with vaccines or antibodies. That's way different than talking about a disease that has a low incidence. In most states, CWD has a lower incidence than deer rabies. You ever heard about deer rabies?
Absolutely.
It's very low incidence. It's like about 0.25%, you know?
Okay, okay, here's another one, because most people have heard of EHD. EHD, I mean, they see, especially in the Midwest, I mean, the deer die, a lot of deer die from EHD. And I think a lot of people associate that, they assume that it's CWD, because we hear so much stuff negative about CWD. So we got a lot of questions that were sent in. Here's one, I'm a hunter, but I'm more concerned about EHD than CWD. Am I correct in that assessment?
As far as mortality and deer is concerned, absolutely. In Georgia, which is my home state, we've lost at times 30% of our deer herds.
EHD?
EHD, yeah.
Okay, here's another one. EHD has decimated whole herds. You don't hear about quarantines happening because of EHD, and it has killed more deer than CWD. Why? It's
that takes a long time to answer that one.
well, real quick, because
and just like Dr. Smith said, you know, we've got one that's a protein-based prion that causes a chronic wasting disease, and the other EHD is a viral disease which is easily transmitted by the midge, and therefore transmission spreading is much quicker.
And death is much quicker.
Death is much quicker because it affects the lungs.
Neurodegenerative diseases like CJD and Kuru and other things take a long, they're called chronic diseases, okay? And it takes a long time to kill an animal.
Years.
To say that an animal goes from normal and healthy to death in 6 weeks with CWD, as was alluded to in the program a week or so ago, that's inaccurate. There was a lot of inaccuracies in that deal. We were told on that program that all cervids can get CWD. That's exactly wrong. There's 13 species of 13 genera of old world cervids and 11 species of new world cervids, and it only affects a few in either one of those categories, not every dadgum genus of cervids.
But these were experts. These were experts.
Well, show me the data. You know, it's like the movie, show me the money. Show me the data. Show me, I want to see the data where it says that this can survive 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That was alluded to, and I want to see the paper.
I mean, there is actually papers out there that actually talk about what some of the things that they talked about that shows that they were very inaccurate on what they said. When they were talking about the crows and the scavengers passing the disease through them after they eat an infected carcass, and it was even referenced that the first time that the crow went to the bathroom, it would be out of their system, which is absolutely false. There is a crow study out there, and maybe some of the people would like to read that. It was done by Dr. Tracy Nichols, and you can read that, but it takes several days for the prions to go completely out of that crow and it become non-infectious. And so there were several things in that Facebook Live that they talked about the other day about several different things that were so inaccurate.
Let me take a second, Keith. One of the objectives of the opposition is to drive people away from hunting, okay? And to raise inaccuracies and public awareness and don't eat this and don't eat that. Look what happened in the state of Wisconsin whenever all of this got blown up into a fire. We've lost 11% of our licensed hunters in Wisconsin.
And you got to sit here and I think about it. I think how hard. I mean, we need to band together as hunters. We need more hunters. Okay, period. I don't care where you hunt, but we need more hunters, and we need to stop fighting against one another and make decisions based upon science. And so when you scare the hell out of people that don't pay attention about chronic wasting disease, and you scare their wives, say, yeah, my husband brought home a deer last year and it's in the freezer and it could have CWD and poison our kids. You're never going deer hunting again.
Scrapie was described in 1732. We've been eating scrapie positive meat for probably 300 years.
And nobody has ever from CWD, nobody has ever gotten sick from eating a deer that's been...
Frequently the sky falls because somebody's looking for research dollars.
Okay, here's one. Is it happening in West Tennessee?
No.
And we have no documentation.
We have never found CWD in West Tennessee.
Okay, here's one. How can you tell if a deer has CWD?
Live testing, we can use palatine tonsil biopsy, we can use rectal associated lymphoid tissue biopsy, and sequential use of the rectal test over time, and sequential use of the palatine tonsil test is as good as and maybe better than the dead test.
Okay, Doc.
So why do we need to kill these beautiful animals in order to get an answer?
Did he talk over y'all's head? Okay, because he talked over my head, and I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit. He's great at talking at people's level, but maybe not as low as me. Let me tell you, I know what he's talking about. I'm going to try to explain it. The rectal, inside the rectum of an animal, okay, just imagine the size of a clock. When he's talking about repeated testing, tissue sample, they go in, and it's very non-invasive, and they take a little snip out of the rectum, out of a portion of the rectum, and they look for 6 follicles. You have to get 6 follicles to be able to test it, and they'll start out at 12 o'clock. Now that portion, the tissue you remove will grow back, but the follicles will not grow back, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so what happens is the next time they're going to do a test, okay,
Move to 2 o'clock.
They go to 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and they can test this animal over and over throughout its life. Okay, and so that's what he's talking about there. And the same thing with going in the tonsils. You've got to have 6 follicles in order to test it. So
Lymphoid follicles.
Live testing is alive and well, and it has been very, very effective.
Well, not only that, the last place that an animal gets CWD and is able to be tested is in the brain. And so that's what everyone else uses. And so the live test that we do actually finds it at an earlier date than it would be found in the brain.
There's good evidence that the palatine tonsil is going to give you a positive animal 6 months or so before the brain test.
There you go. All right, here's one. Came from my hometown of New Braunfels. Could it happen here in our neighborhood? We have so many deer.
White-tailed deer are susceptible to the disease. Has it shown significant population declines in various places in the United States? We don't have good evidence of that. It could happen anywhere. The last 4 or 5 cases of CWD in captive facilities, we've never really gotten the answer of where it came from.
Okay.
Well, there's one thing I want to touch on that for a second is, you know, they want to talk about that this disease is moved around through the animals and everything else. We would love to know how someone moved an animal all the way to the border of Finland with Russia and got the disease over there. You know, how did it get in Norway and all the reindeer in Norway? If it's a disease that's being transferred from animal to animal, and it's from animals in a breeding facility that's transferring the disease, then it would have been pretty hard for it to show up in Norway. It'd have been dang hard to show up on the Russian border. And so there's something different that causes a disease that I am pretty sure they're not aware of at this time, although we are working to get the answer to that question.
Okay, so that comes to the next question here is how is it spread?
The basic information is saliva and urine.
Okay, but
possibly
explain.
gastrointestinal.
And so with that being said, there's a thing people say, well, you ought to have a double fence. Okay, if you could keep the deer from getting contact. I mean, they lick each other's butts. I mean, let's face it. Okay, so how do how do you believe that saliva or the urine is going to spread it?
Well, there's such a thing in microbiology as what we call a multiplicity of infection. In other words, if I give you a certain virus and I don't give you enough, I didn't infect you. You have to have a certain multiplicity of infection, a certain load to get you infected. You know, casual licking of one deer to another, probably not enough exposure. But again, when we do these challenge studies, we've never quantified how much we're actually using. We take infected material from brains of animals, which is loaded with the beta-pleated sheets of the stuff, without really understanding what we're doing, and we go jam that into other animals' brains or blow it up the nose of certain animals. You know, you have to standardize these things. One of the problems that with this testing and research is that we haven't standardized the challenge, we haven't standardized the method of challenge, and we don't really understand where the where the protein is going in the body.
The big thing on that, though, is that it's not environmentally relevant to go through the cranium to add prion protein, because normally that animal is getting exposed through either ocular, orally, or some other method. So I am, for one, that I'm not big on the results that comes out of those
Intracerebral
artificial exposure.
Okay, here's one. So if it's a communicable disease, why allow baiting in deer farms?
We don't really know how infectious it is. It's a frequency-dependent disease. In other words, we have to have multiple exposures. That's the evidence that is the dogma today. It's a frequency-dependent disease, so we have to have repeated exposure, et cetera, et cetera. There's no evidence with prions at all that supplemental feeding has an effect on the spread of the agent. And as a matter of fact, if you look at deer and you look at supplemental feeding, the only place in wildlife where you can confirm that supplemental feeding has had an effect on wildlife disease is where we feed in great big yards up in the upper Midwest. And the disease is an airborne disease called brucellosis. Okay?
Okay.
Well, let me touch on that for a second, because if we were going to talk about baiting or deer breeders causing disease, if that were the case, then we probably should ban acorn trees and wheat fields and
water holes
fields and water holes and all of those things, because if you have 1,000-acre wheat field and there's 300 deer come into that wheat field to eat there's not one deer for every 3 acres scattered around that field. Those 300 deer are in one pile over in one corner. That's the least likely place in that field for someone or a predator to be able to sneak up on them and take their life. And so they are all over there bunched up, and it doesn't matter whether you have a pile of corn over there or if you don't have a pile of corn over there. And the other thing is when they're talking about deer breeding facilities, does the height of the fence and the amount of fences has no relevance. And I can tell you that comes from the very top experts in the field of CWD research. And it doesn't matter. These are people without agendas. And these are people that are actually doing the hands-on research. It does not matter how many fences is there. And so obviously it's not being transferred the way that we have been told it's being transferred.
I think I misspoke when we were talking about the Michigan study. I meant to say tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis.
Not brucellosis. I just want to make the facts are straight.
Okay. You know, we're going to cut this off because we could go on and on and on about this. But like I said at the very beginning, this is a subject that is very important. It's not going away. And it's something that's going to take everybody kind of, like I said, laying down their swords and realizing, you know what, we got to use science. We got to use science to come up with what are we going to do about this? And my hat is off to these guys, but everybody in that room in there, and every deer breeder, because it is the deer breeders that are funding the research that's going on for chronic wasting disease and what's going to ultimately happen in the future with it. I think it's ridiculous when you take a look around the country and you see the different wildlife agencies, their reaction to to it. While one state goes in and they depopulate everything and try to kill everything off, we know that that doesn't work. It didn't work in Wisconsin.
Wyoming says do nothing.
Yeah, Wyoming does nothing. Nothing at all. And so if it's that bad, then why do you have that big a difference? And then some states don't test for it at all. And so with that being said, it's like everybody's got a different reaction to it. And the only thing I can think of is we need to, my hat's off to the deer breeders, because thank God somebody is putting the money and the resources behind the research. And so if y'all have got any questions or comments, please post them below. Share it with your friends. And, make sure and tell everybody about it. We need to come and get some kind of better idea and understanding about chronic wasting disease. And y'all got anything else to add?
Yeah, I have one more comment. The reason that we were so successful in Texas on the way that we went down the road of dealing with CWD is because the agencies, the Texas Animal Health Commission and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, worked with us to come up with the solutions that we've used inside and outside the fence in the state of Texas. You know, we are willing to work with anybody. We want to work with all hunters. We are all hunters ourselves. That's how we got in this industry. It's because of our love of hunting and the animal that we're hunting. And so I would like to reach out to all the people across this country and say, we want to work with all the hunters. We want to work with all the people, all the agency people across this country to solve the problem instead of creating more problems by pointing our fingers at each other. But I would also like to add that not only are we willing to work with all the people across this country and everything, we need to be working together, because you know who else is on this train, kid? Humane Society of the United States also is putting out the very same information that a bunch of these hunting organizations, a bunch of these hunting show people and everything is putting out about us. These people are taking that information, the misinformation that these people are putting out about us, and using it against us, the Humane Society of the United States. So I can make the case that a lot of the hunters and a lot of the people that are making their living out of the hunting industry by having TV shows are actually teaming up with Humane Society of the United States to help do end hunting in our country for the future generations.
And they may not even be aware of it. Is the whole deal. We're going to close out with this. I want to say, if you've got an opinion one way or the other about deer farming, go ahead and post it below. But if you've got a negative opinion about deer farming, I'd really like to know about it. And I'd like to especially encourage you to go to a deer farm. If you've got a negative opinion upon deer farming, deer breeding, go to one. Go to 10 of them. Our gates are always open. Give us a call. I mean, you go to the Deer Breeders Corporation website. We've got hundreds of deer breeders all over the country. And I don't know one. Y'all know one that wouldn't open the gate and say, come on in, see what we're doing. We're not hiding. We're not giving steroids and all that kind of crap to deer. People think we're doing all this stuff to jack them up. They're jacked up on genetics is what I tell people. But the thing is, we're jacked up on research. That's what we want. We want research. We want to encourage you to check out deer farming, deer breeding, and support it. Go to a deer farm and see what it's all about. So I'd like to thank you all.
Well, thank you, Keith, for having us in.
And thank you all for watching. You got any questions, comments? You know what to do.